My girlfriend chose her toxic friends over our relationship, so I walked away and built the life she thought she deserved. What started as weekend criticism sessions turned into a coordinated campaign to destroy us. I learned that when someone lets their friends dictate their love life, you're not dating them, you're dating their entire social circle. I met Iris at a food truck festival 18 months ago, bonding over our shared obsession with obscure vinyl records and those spontaneous weekend drives where you just pick a direction and see where you end up. She was this vibrant energy in Austin's creative scene, managing influencer partnerships for beauty brands while I spent my days deep in blockchain development projects, building smart contract solutions for financial startups. Those first 6 months felt effortless. We'd spend hours digging through record stores like Entones and End of an Ear, talking about everything from cryptocurrency market trends to the philosophical implications of social media culture on authentic human connection. I loved how she'd get genuinely excited when I'd explain complex technical concepts, and she'd share insights about brand psychology that actually influenced how I approached user experience design. When we moved in together after 6 months, I thought I'd found someone who appreciated both my analytical mind and my random bursts of adventure seeking, someone who understood that my methodical approach to life came from genuine care rather than control. That was before her friend group decided I was a threat to their carefully constructed social ecosystem. The shift started subtly during group gatherings at trendy rooftop bars and gallery openings, where I'd notice Nora and the others exchanging pointed looks whenever I'd suggest a quieter venue or fact-check one of their elaborate social media stories about exclusive events they'd attended. I wasn't trying to be difficult. I genuinely enjoyed learning the truth behind things, whether it was verifying a restaurant's sustainability claims or understanding the actual cost breakdown of their weekend getaway plans to expensive resorts. But apparently, asking questions about a $400 dinner when there were equally amazing local spots for $60 made me the group's designated buzzkill, the guy who couldn't just go with the flow and enjoy the moment without analyzing every decision. The criticism became more direct over time, with snide comments about my preference for coding marathons over expensive club nights where bottle service cost more than my monthly grocery budget, jokes about how I probably had spreadsheets for everything including our relationship milestones. They'd roll their eyes when I'd pull out my phone to research a restaurant before making reservations, calling it obsessive when I was just trying to ensure we'd have a good experience without overpaying for mediocre food. Nora, Iris's best friend since art school, seemed particularly invested in highlighting my supposed flaws, constantly making remarks about how creative people needed spontaneity and freedom rather than structure and planning. She'd tell elaborate stories about her own romantic adventures, emphasizing how her partners were always surprising her with last-minute trips to Tulum or impromptu shopping sprees, painting a picture of romance that required financial recklessness. Iris started making excuses for my behavior after these gatherings, explaining to me that her friends felt I was too logical and killing their creative energy with my practical questions and budget-conscious suggestions, as if wanting to make informed decisions was somehow incompatible with artistic expression. I began noticing how she'd distance herself from my opinions in group settings, laughing along when they mocked my habit of researching venues before committing to plans or my insistence on reading the fine print before signing up for their spontaneous weekend trips to expensive destinations. The tension escalated when I started declining their expensive group activities, preferring to spend quality time with Iris doing things we both actually enjoyed, exploring local hiking trails, attending free outdoor concerts, or cooking elaborate meals together, rather than performing for an audience that clearly disapproved of my existence. They interpreted my absence as antisocial behavior rather than financial responsibility, creating this narrative that I was isolating Iris from her support system and stifling her artistic growth through my mere presence in her life, as if my practical nature was somehow contagious and dangerous to their creative spirits. I started noticing how Iris would come home from their gatherings with this conflicted energy, torn between defending our relationship and maintaining her position within their tight-knit social hierarchy. She'd mention offhand comments they'd made about successful creative couples they knew, always emphasizing how those men were more spontaneous, more willing to invest in experiences over savings accounts, more aligned with the artistic lifestyle her friends considered authentic. The pressure was building toward something I couldn't quite identify yet, but I could feel the foundation of our relationship shifting beneath us as outside voices grew louder than our actual shared experiences and genuine connection. The breaking point came during what should have been a relaxing Sunday morning, but Iris had returned from another expensive weekend trip with her friends to some boutique resort in Hill Country, and I could see the familiar tension in her shoulders that meant another group intervention session about our relationship. I had suggested we do something budget-friendly that weekend instead, maybe explore some of the free hiking trails around Austin or check out the local farmers market, but apparently my alternative proposals had become a major topic of discussion among her friends during their spa treatments and poolside gossip sessions. The explosive confrontation started when I casually mentioned that her weekend trip probably cost more than our monthly rent, not as criticism but as an observation about priorities, since we'd been talking about saving money for a potential house down payment. Her reaction was immediate and disproportionate, like I'd triggered some carefully rehearsed speech she'd been practicing during her weekend away with the influence of her manipulative social circle. She launched into this prepared ultimatum about how her friends had opened her eyes to the toxic patterns in our relationship, how I was apparently suffocating her artistic growth through my practical approach to financial planning and my preference for meaningful conversations over superficial social networking events. According to her newly enlightened perspective, courtesy of intensive friend group therapy sessions, I was possessive and controlling because I asked questions about expensive plans and offered alternative suggestions that aligned with our stated financial goals. Nora had been particularly manipulative during this weekend intervention, citing my suggestions for budget-friendly dates as concrete evidence of financial control and emotional manipulation, painting my thoughtful planning as calculated psychological abuse rather than genuine care for our shared future. The friends had apparently spent hours analyzing our relationship dynamics, with Nora leading sessions where they dissected my personality traits and identified concerning patterns that existed primarily in their collective imagination rather than reality. They had convinced Iris that my habit of researching restaurants before making reservations was actually surveillance behavior, that my preference for staying in occasionally instead of going out every night was isolation tactics, and that my questions about her expensive purchases represented attempts to control her autonomy rather than normal couple conversations about shared finances. Iris explained to me, with this rehearsed confidence that felt completely foreign, that preserving her creative friendships was more crucial than our romantic relationship because she had built her personal brand and professional network with these people since art school, while I was merely a romantic distraction who appeared in her life relatively recently. She had been convinced that successful creative people needed friends who understood their artistic vision and supported their spontaneous lifestyle choices, while partners who questioned expensive decisions or suggested practical alternatives were fundamentally incompatible with the creative mindset her career required. The manipulation had been so thorough that she genuinely believed choosing her friends' approval over our partnership was actually a form of self-care and artistic integrity, rather than abandoning a meaningful relationship for toxic social validation. Her friends had successfully reframed every positive aspect of my personality as a character flaw that threatened her creative potential and professional success. My reliability became predictability, my thoughtfulness became control, my financial responsibility became cheapness, and my genuine interest in her life became possessive monitoring that stifled her independence. They had created this narrative where supporting our relationship meant betraying her artistic community, where my presence in her life somehow diminished her creative authenticity and professional credibility among her peers. When she finished her ultimatum speech, I sat quietly for a moment, processing the complete transformation of someone I thought I knew into this stranger who had been programmed to see our entire relationship through the distorted lens of her toxic social circle. I realized that I wasn't just competing with other potential romantic partners for her attention, I was competing with a carefully constructed group identity that required my elimination to maintain its cohesive narrative about creative independence and artistic authenticity. My response was calm and measured, despite the emotional devastation I felt watching someone I loved choose manufactured drama over genuine connection. I told her quietly that if her friends' validation mattered more than our partnership, she should absolutely prioritize their approval over building something real with someone who actually cared about her individual happiness rather than her utility to their social dynamic. I explained that I wouldn't compete with a group of people who needed to tear down our relationship to feel secure about their own life choices, and that she deserved to discover whether their friendship could survive without a common enemy to unite against. The argument ended with Iris dramatically leaving to stay at Nora's loft apartment, dragging an overnight bag she'd apparently packed in advance, while I calmly began organizing my belongings and preparing for the inevitable end of our relationship. I spent that evening reflecting on how systematically I'd been isolated and demonized by people who barely knew me, and how effectively they'd convinced someone I loved that my greatest strengths were actually dangerous flaws that threatened her creative fulfillment and professional success. 3 weeks into our separation, I discovered the true extent of their manipulation through our mutual friend Derek, who worked in digital marketing and had accidentally stumbled across something that made his stomach turn. He called me on a Tuesday evening, his voice tight with anger, explaining that he'd been helping a startup client with social media strategy when he recognized some familiar screenshots in a case study about toxic relationship patterns that Nora had apparently been sharing as examples of controlling behavior. Derek had immediately recognized our text conversations from the timestamps and my distinctive way of structuring messages, realizing that Nora had been secretly screenshotting our private exchanges and sharing them in their group chat to build systematic evidence against me over several months. The messages were strategically cropped to remove context and make my reasonable financial suggestions appear controlling and manipulative, transforming my thoughtful questions into interrogative demands that painted me as psychologically abusive. For instance, when I texted Iris asking if she wanted to check out a new restaurant that had gotten great reviews and fit our budget, Nora's screenshot only showed me saying we needed to stick to our budget, making it appear like I was dictating where she could eat rather than suggesting a fun alternative that aligned with our savings goals. When I'd asked about the cost of her weekend trip because I was trying to plan our monthly budget spreadsheet, the screenshot made it look like I was monitoring her spending and demanding financial justification for her social activities. Derek showed me how they'd created an entire digital dossier of our relationship, with Nora playing amateur psychologist and providing commentary about each interaction that reframed my care as control, my planning as manipulation, and my questions as surveillance tactics designed to isolate Iris from her support system. The group chat had become an echo chamber where they analyzed every aspect of our relationship through the lens of predetermined toxicity, with Nora leading discussions about warning signs and red flags that existed primarily in their collective interpretation rather than actual reality. They had been systematically building a case against me for months, collecting evidence that they could strategically deploy whenever Iris showed signs of happiness or contentment in our relationship, ensuring they always had ammunition ready to undermine any positive developments between us. When I confronted Iris about this digital betrayal, showing her the screenshots Derek had recovered through his professional connections in social media monitoring, her initial reaction was defensive justification rather than horror at the violation of our privacy. She claimed that Nora's actions were actually protective measures designed to help her recognize toxic patterns she was too emotionally involved to see clearly, as if having our private conversations dissected by hostile observers was somehow beneficial to our relationship health. She explained that her friends were genuinely concerned about her well-being and were simply documenting concerning behaviors to help her gain perspective on dynamics that might be harmful to her emotional development and creative growth. The fact that they had been systematically violating our privacy for months and manipulating her perception of our interactions through selective editing and hostile interpretation was initially framed as evidence of their caring friendship rather than calculated psychological manipulation. However, as I walked her through the specific examples of how context had been removed and conversations had been reframed, I could see doubt creeping into her eyes as she began to recognize the deliberate distortion of our actually healthy communication patterns. She started to realize that normal couple discussions about finances, future plans, and daily logistics had been transformed into evidence of controlling behavior through careful editing and malicious interpretation by people who had predetermined that our relationship was toxic. The screenshots revealed that her friend group had been actively sabotaging any positive developments in our relationship, celebrating when we had minor disagreements and strategizing about how to amplify any tensions into major conflicts that would drive us apart. Derek's investigation had uncovered that this digital manipulation campaign had been going on for months, with Nora serving as the primary architect of systematic relationship sabotage disguised as concerned friendship and emotional support. The friend group had been deliberately sabotaging Iris's romantic relationships for 3 years, creating an echo chamber where they controlled her dating choices through coordinated social pressure and manufactured drama that kept her emotionally dependent on their validation and approval. Derek had found evidence in their social media activity patterns showing that this same group had previously targeted Iris's last 2 serious relationships with similar campaigns, systematically undermining any romantic partnership that threatened their collective control over her social and emotional life. They had perfected a technique of identifying positive relationship qualities and reframing them as concerning warning signs, ensuring that any partner who made Iris genuinely happy would eventually be portrayed as psychologically dangerous and incompatible with her creative lifestyle and artistic aspirations. The pattern was consistent across multiple relationships: initial acceptance followed by gradual criticism, strategic isolation of the partner from group activities, careful documentation of normal relationship interactions that could be reframed as concerning patterns, and ultimately a coordinated intervention that convinced Iris to choose their friendship over romantic partnership. Nora had been the consistent driving force behind each relationship sabotage campaign, presenting herself as Iris's protective advocate while actually ensuring that no romantic partner could successfully compete with the friend group's monopoly on her emotional attention and social validation. The shocking truth about Nora's real motivations emerged 2 weeks later when Iris was working on a collaborative art project they'd been developing together, accessing their shared creative folder on cloud storage to retrieve some design files for her portfolio. She had been going through folders of inspiration images and project drafts when she accidentally clicked into a subfolder labeled Personal Reflections that she'd never noticed before, assuming it contained Nora's artistic inspiration or creative writing exercises. Instead, she discovered an extensive collection of explicit love poems that Nora had written about her over the past 4 years, detailed fantasies about their potential romantic relationship, and obsessive journal entries analyzing every aspect of Iris's personality, appearance, and daily activities with the intensity of someone deeply infatuated rather than platonically supportive. The poems were incredibly personal and romantic, describing intimate moments they'd shared as friends but reimagining them as romantic encounters, expressing jealousy about Iris's relationships with men, and outlining elaborate fantasies about what their life together could look like if Iris would recognize their destined connection. Nora had been documenting her romantic obsession for years, writing detailed analyses of Iris's dating patterns and developing strategic plans for eliminating romantic competitors who threatened her vision of their eventual relationship. The journal entries revealed that Nora's manipulation extended far beyond my relationship, as she had systematically convinced Iris that previous boyfriends were creatively incompatible through similar screenshot campaigns and coordinated group intervention strategies designed to isolate her from romantic partnerships. She had been playing the long game for 4 years, positioning herself as Iris's most trusted confidant and emotional support system while secretly harboring romantic feelings and actively sabotaging any relationship that could potentially lead to serious commitment or marriage. The folder contained detailed character assassinations of Iris's previous partners, strategic plans for undermining their relationships, and celebration entries whenever Nora successfully convinced Iris to end a promising romantic connection in favor of prioritizing their friendship and creative collaboration. Nora had been methodically collecting information about each boyfriend's perceived weaknesses and insecurities, then weaponizing that intelligence to convince Iris that these men were fundamentally incompatible with her artistic lifestyle and long-term happiness. The manipulation had been so sophisticated that she'd convinced Iris that choosing male romantic partners over female friendships represented internalized misogyny and betrayal of feminist creative principles, essentially guilt-tripping her into prioritizing their pseudo-romantic friendship over genuine romantic relationships with appropriate partners. When Iris confronted the friend circle about their coordinated interference in her personal relationships, showing them evidence of Nora's systematic manipulation and hidden romantic agenda, their reaction was immediate hostility and defensive deflection rather than concern for Iris's emotional well-being. Instead of acknowledging that they had enabled Nora's psychological manipulation for years, They turned on Iris with vicious personal attacks, accusing her of being ungrateful for their friendship and support, claiming she was delusional about Nora's intentions, and suggesting that her emotional instability was causing her to misinterpret normal friendship behaviors as something sinister. The friend group revealed their toxic need to control Iris's personal choices rather than support her authentic happiness, making it clear that their friendship had always been conditional on her compliance with their collective preferences about her romantic relationships and life decisions. They accused her of betraying their trust by snooping through Nora's private files, completely ignoring the fact that those files contained evidence of years of systematic psychological manipulation and relationship sabotage that had damaged her ability to form healthy romantic connections. Their immediate instinct was to protect Nora's reputation and maintain group cohesion rather than address the serious violation of trust and emotional manipulation that had been occurring under their collective approval and encouragement. The confrontation escalated when they demanded that Iris choose between believing Nora's explanations about the romantic writings being artistic expression and creative exploration versus maintaining her accusations of manipulation and emotional abuse. They presented her with an ultimatum remarkably similar to the one she'd given me, insisting that her continued friendship with their group required accepting Nora's behavior as harmless creative expression rather than recognizing it as evidence of a sophisticated psychological manipulation campaign designed to isolate her from romantic happiness. When Iris refused to pretend that years of systematic relationship sabotage were normal friendship behaviors, they immediately excommunicated her from their social circle, blocking her on all platforms and spreading rumors about her emotional instability and paranoid delusions throughout Austin's interconnected creative community. 3 months after our separation, Iris realized she had sacrificed both her meaningful relationship and her friend group when they completely excommunicated her for defending my character to outsiders and refusing to accept Nora's romantic manipulation as harmless creative expression. The isolation hit her harder than she'd anticipated, as she discovered that her entire social identity had been built around this toxic group dynamic, and without their constant validation and shared activities, she felt completely adrift in Austin's creative scene where everyone seemed to know about her dramatic falling out with her former best friends. She had lost not just her social circle but also several professional opportunities, as Nora had been strategically spreading rumors about her emotional instability and unreliable behavior to mutual contacts in the influencer marketing industry, effectively sabotaging her career prospects while maintaining the appearance of innocent concern for her mental health. Iris launched a desperate campaign to reconnect with me through multiple platforms, sending elaborate video messages that detailed Nora's psychological manipulation tactics and provided evidence of the systematic relationship sabotage she'd uncovered in their shared files. These weren't simple apology texts but comprehensive presentations where she walked through screenshot evidence, analyzed the manipulation patterns, and explained how thoroughly she'd been brainwashed into seeing our healthy relationship dynamics as concerning warning signs that threatened her creative authenticity and artistic independence. She sent detailed explanations of how Nora had weaponized feminist rhetoric to convince her that prioritizing romantic relationships over female friendships represented internalized misogyny, essentially guilt-tripping her into abandoning genuine romantic connections in favor of maintaining the toxic group dynamic that kept her emotionally dependent on their approval and validation. Her messages became increasingly frantic and desperate as weeks passed without response, with her pleading for just one opportunity to rebuild the damaged trust and prove that she finally understood the difference between genuine concern and manipulative control disguised as protective friendship. She offered to attend couples counseling, move to a different city to escape the toxic social environment, and completely restructure her life around rebuilding our partnership rather than maintaining social connections that had proven destructive to her emotional well-being and romantic happiness. During this reconciliation campaign, I had already begun dating Luna, a sustainable architecture designer who celebrated my analytical mind and shared my passion for meaningful conversations over superficial networking events that dominated Austin's creative social scene. Luna was everything Iris's friend group had convinced her to reject, someone who appreciated thoughtful planning, valued financial responsibility, and found my detailed approach to life endearing rather than controlling or suffocating to her creative spirit. She actually got excited when I'd research restaurants before dates, appreciating the effort I put into finding places that aligned with both our values and budget, and she'd contribute her own research about sustainable practices and architectural features that made dining experiences more meaningful than just expensive Instagram opportunities. The contrast was remarkable, as Luna understood that my methodical approach to relationships came from genuine care and desire to build something lasting rather than need to control or manipulate her autonomy and creative expression. Iris's reconciliation attempts became increasingly frantic when she discovered my new relationship through social media, where Luna and I had posted photos from a blockchain technology conference we'd attended together, looking genuinely happy and intellectually engaged rather than performing happiness for social validation. The realization that I'd moved on with someone who appreciated exactly the qualities her friend group had convinced her were toxic triggered a complete emotional breakdown, as she finally understood that Nora's manipulation had cost her not just our relationship but also her ability to recognize genuine compatibility and healthy relationship dynamics. She started appearing unannounced at my cryptocurrency meetups and blockchain development workshops, creating awkward scenes where she tried to publicly declare her newfound understanding of manipulation tactics while other attendees looked on with uncomfortable confusion about the personal drama interrupting professional networking events. Her desperate behavior escalated to sending expensive tech gadgets to my apartment, high-end mechanical keyboards, premium noise-canceling headphones, and advanced development tools that cost more than her monthly rent, apparently believing that expensive gestures could somehow compensate for months of psychological manipulation and emotional abandonment influenced by her toxic social circle. These gifts felt particularly hollow because they demonstrated that she still didn't understand the fundamental issue wasn't about money or material gestures, but about the fact that she'd chosen social validation over our genuine connection and had allowed outside voices to completely redefine our healthy relationship dynamics as concerning warning signs. Her former friends actively sabotaged her reconciliation efforts by spreading malicious rumors about her emotional instability and desperate behavior throughout Austin's tight-knit creative community, ensuring that her professional reputation suffered while also making it clear to anyone who might listen that she was stalking her ex-boyfriend and making elaborate attempts to manipulate him back into a relationship through expensive gifts and public emotional displays. The social consequences of standing up to Nora's manipulation were severe and long-lasting, as the friend group had significant influence within Austin's creative networking circles and could effectively blacklist anyone who challenged their narrative about healthy relationship dynamics and appropriate friendship boundaries. 8 months later, Iris dramatically confronted Luna and me at the Austin Blockchain Innovation Conference, a quarterly event where I regularly attended weekend workshops to stay current with emerging cryptocurrency technologies and connect with other developers working on decentralized finance projects. Luna and I had set up a networking table to discuss her sustainable architecture firm's integration with blockchain-based carbon credit tracking systems, a collaboration we'd been developing that combined her environmental expertise with my technical development skills in ways that felt both professionally exciting and personally meaningful. We were deep in conversation with a potential client about implementing smart contracts for renewable energy certificates when I noticed a familiar figure approaching our booth with the determined stride of someone who'd been planning this confrontation for weeks. Iris appeared at our networking table looking dramatically different from the confident creative professional I'd once known, her appearance reflecting months of emotional turmoil and social isolation that had clearly taken a severe toll on her mental health and professional presentation. She looked thinner, with dark circles under her eyes and the desperate energy of someone who'd been rehearsing this moment in her mind for months, convinced that a grand public gesture could somehow undo the damage caused by her previous choices and the systematic manipulation she'd finally recognized. Without any acknowledgement of the professional setting or the confused clients we were speaking with, she launched into a loud, emotional speech about how Luna was merely a temporary replacement and that I belonged with someone who truly understood my visionary potential and creative compatibility rather than settling for surface-level intellectual connection. Her voice carried across the conference floor as she declared that our relationship had been destroyed by outside manipulation rather than genuine incompatibility, and that she'd learned to recognize the difference between protective friendship and psychological control that had systematically sabotaged her ability to maintain healthy romantic partnerships. The scene became increasingly uncomfortable as other conference attendees stopped their conversations to stare at this emotional spectacle unfolding at what was supposed to be a professional networking event focused on technological innovation rather than personal relationship drama. Iris seemed completely oblivious to the inappropriate nature of her public emotional breakdown, continuing to plead her case while Luna and I exchanged glances that communicated our shared discomfort with this violation of professional boundaries and social etiquette. What made the situation even more mortifying was the presence of several familiar faces from Austin's creative community, including Nora and two other former friends who had apparently attended this conference specifically to witness and document Iris's predicted emotional meltdown for their social media entertainment. They immediately began recording the incident on their phones, positioning themselves strategically to capture the most humiliating angles while exchanging knowing looks that suggested they'd anticipated this exact scenario and were delighted to have their predictions about Iris's desperate behavior confirmed in such a public forum. The former friends were clearly enjoying this validation of their narrative about Iris's emotional instability and inappropriate boundary violations, gathering evidence that would support their ongoing character assassination campaign throughout Austin's interconnected creative and professional networks. Luna handled the situation with remarkable grace and professionalism, calmly introducing herself to our confused clients as my partner in both business and personal contexts, briefly explaining that we were dealing with an unfortunate personal situation that didn't reflect the professional standards of our collaborative work on sustainable blockchain applications. She managed to redirect the conversation back to our carbon credit tracking project while I dealt with the immediate crisis of Iris's public emotional breakdown, demonstrating the exact kind of composed problem-solving approach that had initially attracted me to her practical and thoughtful personality. I professionally but firmly explained to Iris that this wasn't an appropriate venue for personal conversations and suggested she contact me through proper channels if she needed to discuss something important, though I made it clear that our romantic relationship was permanently concluded and that her public behavior was damaging her professional reputation in ways that would have long-term career consequences. The incident spread rapidly through Austin's tech and creative networks within hours, as multiple attendees had recorded different angles of Iris's emotional outburst and began sharing edited versions across various social platforms with commentary ranging from sympathetic concern about mental health struggles to cruel mockery about desperate ex-girlfriend behavior at professional events. Her former friends contributed particularly vicious commentary about this being exactly the kind of predictable breakdown they'd warned people about, positioning themselves as prescient protectors of the community who had correctly identified concerning behavioral patterns that were now being publicly displayed for everyone to witness and judge. 15 months later, I proposed to Luna during a private stargazing session at the McDonald Observatory west of Austin, having discovered someone who valued my authentic intellect over social performance expectations and genuinely appreciated the thoughtful planning that went into creating meaningful shared experiences rather than expensive Instagram opportunities. The proposal itself reflected everything I'd learned about building a relationship with someone who truly understood my values, as I'd spent weeks researching the optimal lunar calendar timing for celestial visibility and coordinating with the observatory staff to arrange private telescope access for viewing Saturn's rings and Jupiter's moons during peak atmospheric conditions. Luna was genuinely moved by the effort I'd put into creating this perfect moment that combined our shared fascination with technology, sustainability, and the natural world, understanding that my detailed planning came from love rather than control, appreciation rather than obsession with managing every aspect of our relationship dynamics. She said yes while we were looking through the telescope at distant galaxies, and we spent the rest of the night talking about our future plans for expanding her sustainable architecture practice and my blockchain development projects into collaborative ventures that could make meaningful environmental impact. The contrast with my previous relationship couldn't have been more stark, as Luna celebrated my analytical approach to problem solving and appreciated how I researched sustainable venues for our wedding planning, sought out ethical vendors who aligned with our environmental values, and created detailed spreadsheets for managing our budget in ways that prioritized meaningful experiences over superficial luxury that would generate social media validation. Meanwhile, Iris remained professionally isolated from Austen's creative circles and struggled to establish new collaborations due to her reputation for prioritizing friend group drama over romantic stability, with many potential business partners having heard secondhand accounts of her public breakdown at the blockchain conference and her pattern of allowing personal relationships to interfere with professional opportunities. The creative community had essentially blacklisted her not because of her confrontation with Nora's manipulation, but because of her subsequent desperate behavior that violated professional boundaries and demonstrated poor judgment about appropriate social contexts for personal emotional expression. She had burned bridges with several influential figures in Austen's influencer marketing industry by involving them in her relationship drama, asking them to choose sides between her version of events and Nora's carefully constructed narrative about her emotional instability and unreliable professional behavior. Her isolation deepened as she realized that rebuilding her career would require leaving Austen entirely and starting fresh in a different city where her reputation hadn't been systematically destroyed by the combination of Nora's strategic character assassination campaign and her own poor choices about how to handle the aftermath of recognizing that manipulation. She made one final attempt to reach me through a professional LinkedIn connection request, claiming she needed closure for her mental health and offering a comprehensive apology for allowing external manipulation to destroy our partnership, along with detailed explanations of the psychological therapy work she'd been doing to understand how she'd been programmed to see healthy relationship dynamics as concerning warning signs. Her message was actually quite thoughtful and demonstrated genuine insight into the manipulation tactics she'd fallen victim to, acknowledging that her friend group had systematically sabotaged not just our relationship but her ability to recognize genuine compatibility and authentic emotional connection versus social validation and group approval. She explained that she'd spent months in individual therapy working through the trauma of realizing that her closest friendships had been elaborate deceptions designed to control her romantic choices and keep her emotionally dependent on their approval rather than building healthy independence and authentic personal relationships. The apology included recognition that her desperate reconciliation attempts had been inappropriate and counterproductive, that her public breakdown at the conference had damaged both our professional reputations, and that her inability to accept the consequences of her choices had prevented her from processing the loss in healthy ways that might have led to genuine personal growth. However, I shared the message with Luna, who encouraged maintaining strict no-contact boundaries regardless of how thoughtful or genuine the apology appeared, pointing out that engaging with Iris's need for closure would inevitably lead to reopening wounds that had finally healed and potentially destabilizing the healthy relationship we'd built together. We immediately blocked Iris across all digital platforms while planning our intimate destination wedding ceremony in Costa Rica, surrounded by Luna's family and my close friends who had supported our relationship from the beginning and understood why maintaining boundaries with toxic people was essential for protecting our shared future. The wedding was everything I'd always imagined a meaningful celebration should be, focused on sustainability and genuine connection rather than expensive displays designed for social media validation, with locally sourced organic food, renewable energy-powered venues, and activities that reflected our shared values and authentic personalities rather than performing happiness for external approval. Iris's former friend circle continued their destructive pattern with new creative recruits, targeting other young women in Austen's influencer marketing industry and repeating the same manipulation tactics that had nearly destroyed her ability to maintain healthy romantic relationships. But she had finally developed the emotional intelligence to recognize these patterns and chose professional solitude over toxic social validation that required abandoning personal happiness for group approval. Her isolation was painful but necessary for breaking the cycle of manipulation that had controlled her romantic choices for years, and according to mutual acquaintances, she eventually moved to Portland where she slowly began rebuilding her career and learning to trust her own judgment about relationships rather than outsourcing those decisions to social groups with hidden agendas that prioritized control over genuine friendship and emotional support.